Well, I'm James Olley, joined by Mark Ogden and Rob Dawson. Gentlemen, should we be bringing out a cake to celebrate 1 year of INEOS? Let's go back a year to the takeover. It was originally announced on Christmas Eve, but took till nearly the end of February to go through. And in his first interview, Sir Jim Ratcliffe said that Manchester United must walk to the right solution and not run to the wrong one. Are they walking in the right direction, or are they going backwards?
I think they're making a bit of a mess of it no matter what they're doing, walking or running, because you're right, what they said, walk to the right solution. But it just seems that they've been stumbling to every decision they've made. You know, they've taken time with some. Erik ten Hag, by the way, retaining him. It took a while to retain him in the summer. It took about 2 or 3 weeks after the cup final, but that was the wrong decision. Ruben Amorim was quite quick. The redundancies they've announced, the Dan Ashworth situation lasted, I think, longer on gardening leave in the job. So I'm not quite buying the Jim Ratcliffe mentality that they're going to walk to the decisions rather than rush into them. Whatever way they've done it, they've stumbled and fallen flat on the face.
I think one of perhaps the issues that has affected INEOS over the last year is that the Glazers were so unpopular at Man United that a lot of fans probably thought that anyone would be better, that anyone that could come in and do a better job almost immediately. And there certainly was that kind of level of optimism when INEOS came in. I think what's followed in the last year has been quite underwhelming anyway, but particularly underwhelming when you compare it against the level of optimism that was generated when they came in. And that was simply down to how unpopular the Glazers are. So when you put those two things together, then you don't get that immediate reward from having new stewardship. You know, things aren't immediately seen to be right on the right track. I think it creates this kind of uncertainty, I suppose you could call it, or worry or concern at most that maybe this kind of bright new future that was being built a year ago, maybe it's not like that. And maybe they're in for kind of more years of disappointment instead of this kind of immediate jump back to this great club that they once were. So I just think when you throw all of that together over the last year, we're at a point now, a year on, where fans are just kind of watching and waiting, and the jury's still out, certainly.
I spoke to during the process. I did speak to somebody who has worked for both camps actually, but he spent a lot more time working with INEOS. And this was probably January, February time, as it was close that they were going to finalise the deal. And this person said to me, it's going to get much worse than before it gets better. And I thought, come on, it can't do, because United were in a real state when INEOS took over. And I'm thinking, how on earth can it get worse? Because they were nowhere near challenging the title. They were out of the Champions League running. The situation with Ten Hag was obviously ongoing all season. I just thought there's no way it can get worse. And, you know, Rob and I have spent a week just looking at, you know, the major issues of the takeover and the year since. And it has got worse. And I'm still struggling to get my head around how the club are in such financial difficulties. I just can't work it out in the sense that they make so much money. Yes, they're not in the Champions League. They're not earning so much money through prize money these days. But I don't understand how they can be losing so much money and why they need to make so many huge job cuts. It doesn't stack up to me. And I don't know what the end game is. I don't know what the INEOS end game is. But right now, they seem not to have a clue how to run a football club.
Well, you talk about the end game there. That was going to be my question, really, which is that I guess when a business as big as INEOS, as successful as INEOS in other fields, comes into a mess of a club like Manchester United, I think most fans probably thought, okay, well, at the very least, there's going to be a clear plan, a clear sense of direction, and a sort of methodology in what they do. How much of it is actually, do you get a sense, has sort of been made up on the hoof? When you think about hiring Dan Ashworth, getting rid of Dan Ashworth, keeping Ten Hag, but looking for another manager, then backing him with money in the market, then sacking him. Have they been more reactionary than anyone anticipated?
I mean, I think it's easy to stick the boot into INEOS, and I'm sure that over the course of this podcast that we will do it at different junctures. But as far as I can tell, there have been green flags and there have been red flags. So INEOS come in and immediately start looking at the structure of the club and the people in those key structural positions. And that was a big criticism of the Glazers, that they just didn't hire the right people off the pitch, that they were obsessed with these superstar players. They were only interested in signing the likes of Paul Pogba and Alexis Sanchez. They weren't really interested in having a really strong structure behind the football club. And INEOS immediately come in and say, well, we're gonna fix that. We've identified that as an area we can change, and we're going to hire the best-in-class people to fill these really key roles off the field. In America, we could term front office, wouldn't it? So that, to me, is a green flag that you're not just looking for like a quick fix. The issue then, though, is that you've mentioned it there, the Dan Ashworth situation, that you have Sir Jim Ratcliffe talking for a long time that they want Dan Ashworth as a sporting director. Sporting director is this really key role in modern football clubs. Dan Ashworth is the best guy around, and we're just going to pull all the stops out to get this best guy. We don't care that he's at Newcastle. We don't care he's got, we need to buy him out of his contract. We're going to pay that money because we know that he's the right guy for the job. And then 5 months later, you let him go, and you're briefing that it's because you're not particularly aligned in the way that you see key decisions. Now, fair enough. Executives fall out all the time, but it tends to happen after sort of 5-10 years. For that to happen almost immediately, that Dan Ashworth walks in the door, that is a massive red flag, because that to me screams that you've not done your due diligence over that really key appointment. You've not sat down with him or his advisors and gone, right, let's find out whether we're really aligned about where this football club is going. What would you do in this situation? What would you do in that situation? And iron all that stuff out before you get to a point where 5 months after he's walked in the door, at a cost of around 6 million, a conservative cost of around 6 million, it could be way more than that. No one actually knows. It costs an awful lot of money, and then you're having to sack him straight away. That, to me, given that we're not even a year into their stewardship, is a massive red flag. So there are positives, but there are also massive, massive concerns for journalists like us and for fans as well.
There are two ways you can look at the Dan Ashworth situation. I mean, my view is that they hired the wrong guy for the wrong job. That Dan Ashworth is respected for building a structure of a club and building it behind the scenes and getting the right people in place. What he isn't is a sporting director. He's not a guy that will pick up the phone to people in Italy, Spain, Germany, Turkey, wherever, to find a player and to offload a player. If you want something like that, you look at, I don't know, Monchi at Aston Villa, somebody who's got a real track record of doing it over the years. It's a different role. Dan Ashworth is a guy in a suit who works behind the scenes, and that is why he was successful at the FA and later at Brighton and Newcastle. So INEOS hired the wrong guy for the wrong job, and then obviously
director rather than the sporting director.
Yeah, and he had a difficult summer, the transfer window. So I was told that the club didn't want Matthijs de Ligt. Matthijs de Ligt was a signing that was kind of driven through by Erik ten Hag, and despite the fact they felt they were well stocked with centre halves, United or Dan Ashworth felt that because they'd just given ten Hag a new contract, they had to show they had faith in him by signing a player he wanted. So you could say that was a weakness on Dan Ashworth's part. He should not have given that the green light. The flip side is that Joshua Zirkzee is a player that's really struggled this year, that he was a signing that was driven by Dan Ashworth and the recruitment team. So his first window wasn't great. So having made the wrong appointment, you have to maybe give INEOS credit for getting rid of him, because the wrong decision would be to keep him in place. So whereas someone see it as a red flag, it looks like a mistake, and it was a mistake, at least they've addressed it. But the issue for me at times, and we wrote this, Rob and I, before Christmas, that people like Dave Brailsford have come into United with a track record in another sport and talking to players. And I know that a lot of the players have been distinctly unimpressed by Dave Brailsford and what he says he can do. Trying to apply methods that were successful in a different sport a decade ago doesn't work in football. And there's an arrogance within the INEOS camp that they know everything, they've got the right answers. Somebody used the phrase to me, it's the cult of Jim, that basically Jim Ratcliffe sets the tone and everybody just nods their head because that's what he wants. And the INEOS group is very much along those lines, middle-aged men that are just kind of in awe of Jim Ratcliffe and his brutal, ruthless, blunt approach to things. And, I've not seen anything from Dave Brailsford, apart from the fact he likes to see necessary folks in the director's box that says he knows anything about running a football club. But he's there, and he's been there a year now, and I think we need to see a little bit more of the fruits of his so-called expertise, because right now, a lot of the decisions he's been associated with have been failures.
We're going to hear more from a special guest in a moment, but I just want to get your two take on sort of the mood and the sentiment among the supporters towards INEOS. I mean, it feels from the outside that it's quite remarkable that it's turned so sour against them so quickly, given the level of animosity that there was towards the Glazers in the first place. I mean, you guys are there most weeks at Old Trafford. I mean, have you been surprised about how quickly it seems to have turned sour?
A little bit. I thought that Sir Jim would kind of ride that wave of optimism that I spoke about before a little bit longer. I think that maybe he is underestimated how big a job it is to turn Man United around, and also the fans, I think, are underestimated a little bit about how much work needs to go in to kind of get United back to, because you're not talking about getting United back sort of into the top 6, top 4. You're talking about re-establishing themselves as the dominant force of English football and European football, which is a massive task from where they are now. I think it's interesting when you start talking about the fans, though, because this, to me, this all kind of cuts to the very core of what fans want from a football club. Every decision, every unpopular decision that INEOS have made has come with a caveat that we need to do this to get Man United winning on the pitch. Now, they think that that's the be-all. Apparently, they think that's the be-all and end-all. But you've also got fans, particularly fans in Manchester, who will tell you that, well, to have Man United winning isn't my sole reason for supporting Man United. You know, I want affordable tickets. I want to be able to go and see my football club every week. I quite like that there's a charitable arm, a foundation that's doing really good work around Manchester and Greater Manchester with schools and with kids. I want my club to look after former players of 40 years ago who perhaps haven't got the millions that the modern players have. I want to feel that my club is connected to the community and they understand their responsibility within the community. On the flip side of that, you'll also get fans who will say, well, I don't really care about any of that. My sole purpose for supporting Man United is to watch them win the Premier League title and the Champions League. And there is this kind of culture clash at the moment between groups of fans, and there is a division about what they want out of their club. Because I understand INEOS have sort of said, well, we need to raise ticket prices because we've got these huge debts. We're sailing close to the wind in terms of PSL. We need to increase revenue. We can't afford to have cheap ticket prices. We need to raise ticket prices to £66 mid-season and get rid of concessions. We need to make all these redundancies at the club. We can't afford to have Sir Alex Ferguson as a paid ambassador. And every time they do that, they say all that money that they're saving, that needs to go into the first team to make us win on the pitch again. But there are an awful lot of fans. I mean, the Manchester United Supporters Trust have come out and said, exactly this, that they want, what is the point of a football club if you can't afford to go and watch it? So it's difficult. It's and I'm not suggesting that one side of that debate is more right than the other. As a football fan, a United fan, whether you're in Manchester, whether you're in Salford, whether you're in Tokyo or Beijing, you are well within your rights to demand a certain thing from your football club. I don't think one side is any more right than the other. But there is this huge split now within Man United's fan base as to what they believe a football club should be. And it's a really tricky line to navigate.
But the thing is, though, right, nowadays, it's like back in the day, 30 years ago, it was fans that went to the games. That was it. Now it's match-going fans, it's fans online, it's fans across the world. And it's difficult to put your finger on which one it is. But just in terms of the match-going fan, I'm not surprised that they've already turned or become disgruntled with Jim Ratcliffe, because Man United fans over the years have always been quite an active fan group, going back to the early 90s when they were unhappy about the club being listed on the stock exchange as a PLC. They didn't like the owner then. They wanted Michael Knighton in charge in 1990. They fought against Rupert Murdoch and Robert Maxwell taking over the club. They fought against the Glazers. A lot of the fans from that generation are still unhappy with Sir Alex Ferguson for almost opening the door for the Glazers to come into the club. So at every stage of the last 30, 40 years, the Man United fans have acted against the club. There's always been a drive for United to become like an English version of Barcelona, a fan-owned club, but that is just not going to happen because of the value of the club right now. They've got a fan in charge. He's not really acting much like a fan, Jim Ratcliffe, because, you think he'd want a bit more on the pitch, but he's saying a lot of the wrong things. But no, to answer your question, James, I'm not surprised that Man United fans are taking not a lot of time to turn on the board. But one thing I will say is that, fans as well, they can't be both ways, because with me and Robert at the cup final last season, the fans were pleading for the club for Eric Ten Hag to stay. He won the FA Cup and they were all applauding him and and waving to him, and Ten Hag must stay. So in many ways, I think that kind of spooked the owners. I think that they decided to keep Ten Hag because they didn't want the negativity of sacking him. So the fans, in many ways, you got to be careful what you wish for. Sometimes you wanted Ten Hag to stay, and it was the wrong decision. But INEOS buckled to the fans' view. So fans carry it both ways. But that has always been the case, hasn't it? Fans want it every way they want it, and they can't be that way.
Well, let's see which way our special guest wants it this week, and hear direct from a prominent supporter in the fan base. We're joined by Flex from the United View to get a better idea of what the fans are thinking. Flex, thanks for your time. We'll talk more specifically in a bit, but just generally speaking to start with, as a fan, what's your overall feeling of this first year of INEOS?
I don't think it's gone as smooth sailing, and there's been as much improvement as we would have liked within the first year. I think you'll be incredibly naive as a Manchester United fan to expect Sir Jim Ratcliffe and INEOS to come in after 17, 18 years plus years of failing and expect them to have a wand and Manchester United to be fixed within 12 months. I don't think any Manchester United fan realistically thought that. But I think it's safe to say that a lot of Man United fans thought there would be more improvement than what we have seen. I think they initially started off well with their intent, and I think they started off well with the assembling of a proper footballing structure and removing the people who had made bad decisions on transfers and player recruitment, etc., for many years under the last ownership. Well, even though the Glazers are still there, but under the last stewardship of the Glazers. So that was a good start. But I think things started to go wrong as the results started to get worse with Erik ten Hag, and they second guessed themselves of should they not sack him. They stayed with Erik ten Hag. They decided to invest more players for Erik ten Hag, only to subsequently sack him. Sir Jim Ratcliffe, his public, very, very public admiration of Dan Ashworth and his scathing sort of analysis of Newcastle United during those negotiations, brandished them, I think, silly or stupid at one point, saying they're a bit difficult to deal with and Dan is the best in class, only to get him in, and 5 months later, he's sacked as well. And then you talk about the ticket prices and the lack of communication with fans and the sort of the bad decisions that have basically, they've been complicit in making us struggle to be financially viable. I know it's their job to fix it, and it wasn't them who put us into this mess initially, but they haven't made the best of decisions in the first year to basically calm fans down and encourage us to think, okay, we're in safe hands here. So yeah, not the best of starts.
Obviously, as we all know, there's sort of two realities. There's what we see inside the stadium, and then there's social media, which can often be something entirely different. I mean, have you noticed a distinction between the sort of match day going fans and maybe what you're hearing on your social media channels? Is there more sort of vitriol backlash to INEOS online perhaps than there is in the stadium?
Online, of course, you get it a lot, and when we discuss on our online communities, we do live shows every morning. And actually, this morning I was sort of, I'm not going to say arguing with my own community, but there is a lot of heat on INEOS saying, phrases that they're the Glazers 2.0. They joined the Glazers to enable them. They gave the Glazers a way out. And you sort of have to push back on some of it when you want to be more measured and say, well, hang on a minute. Just because INEOS decided to take a minority share in Manchester United does not mean that the Glazers are off the hook. The Glazers had no other options. The Glazers didn't want to sell 100% of Manchester United. The Glazers didn't receive a bid that they thought was worth selling 100% of Manchester United. So the Glazers sold the bit that they wanted to sell. They would have done that, whether it was INEOS, whether it was investors who were looking to do that anyway. Somebody was going to offer up that money. But at the same time, online, I think it's been a lot more scathing. Absolutely. They're not happy, and rightly so. And to be fair, I've seen, I traveled to quite a few away games, and especially at the home games as well. And you hear fans chatting on the concourse. It hasn't been too dissimilar, actually. Usually there is quite a big difference between maybe online and in the stadium, especially when it comes to managers and should they be sacked and a bit more patience. That's a bit different. But I have to say, guys, in terms of INEOS, it's been quite scathing across the board. I haven't seen too many match-going fans and had many conversations with them, and they say, well, it's going really well, and Sir Jim's been made out to be some guy. He's not. He's having a hard time. Most people are very critical of him, whether it be online or the match-going fans I've seen.
Flex, I was at the I was at the Fulham game last month, and that was the night that the fans really turned on Jim Ratcliffe. They were singing. I won't repeat it here, but it's fairly obvious they weren't happy with him. Are you surprised at how brutal it has been, not just from the fans, but how brutal it's been with INEOS, the job cuts, the ticket prices? I mean, the £300 million losses over the last 2 or 3 years, which doesn't really tally with the fact that I think recently Deloitte published their club revenue list of the last year, and United are fourth. They're still making lots of money. So it doesn't kind of stack up, does it, that they're losing all this money, but they're making lots of money, and Jim Ratcliffe seems to be just burning through all of it.
Exactly. I'm not surprised by it, Mark. I'm not, because you can't pull the wool over the fans' eyes. I think especially when you've had an ownership like the Glazers, who have mistreated the club for so long and made such bad decisions and haven't been really bothered what happens to even allow the club to get to this state, fans are going to be onlooking with very, very scathing eyes, very, very significant eyes in terms of who was going to take up this next position, and it happened to be INEOS. So I'm not surprised at the scrutiny because of the decisions that they've made. I do understand that they had to start somewhere, because the question is if Manchester United are financially failing, how do they fix it? They can't keep spending like they're spending. They can't keep recruiting like they're recruiting. They can't keep operating how they're operating. So what has to change? And I understand that there has to be change. I don't think Manchester United fans, again, are naive enough to think that things don't have to change. But when you look at the way that it's been done, when they've been complicit and added to some of the financial strain, like I said, the Ruben Amorim situation, you have to pay compensation to him. You have to pay compensation to Eric Ten Hag and his coaching staff to get rid of him. You invested a further 200 odd million quid in Eric Ten Hag's team. The Dan Ashworth situation, you've also made cuts along the way. So you're basically saying that the decisions that you've made, you've basically undone financially because you've made poor decisions. And then you're asking the fans to foot the bill of that without even explaining that, without any line of communication. And I think the concession is that, to ask people, potentially pensioners or people who don't work anymore, to be paying that without any sort of communication as to why, I just think was awful. And the same for under 16s as well. I just think it was so badly done and just so tone deaf from INEOS. So I'm not surprised at how scathing the fans have been. Of course, there needs to be patience. Of course, there needs to be calm. But I just don't think INEOS have pulled the right mechanisms in terms of trying to allow fans, or at least give fans a chance to say, okay, well, there's a little bit of calm here. We're going in the right direction. And you couple that, of course, with Manchester United being 13th/14th/15th in the league. And things haven't seemed to got better. So on the pitch and off the pitch, it's been a nightmare.
What then is the view, do you think, of Ruben Amorim, of the fans? I mean, do they sort of accept that with all the bigger picture that we're talking about here and the sort of long-term changes that are needed and a lot of the pain off the field that INEOS is inflicting, hopefully for United's point of view to come out the other side as a stronger team. In the middle of all that, you've got a manager new to the league who's losing games, a lot of games, team in the bottom half of the table. And obviously he's been very rigid in sticking to his system, even though palpably the squad doesn't suit that. I mean, what's the sort of general view of how Ruben Amorim's doing in the middle of what is obviously a very difficult wider picture?
I think there's a lot of understanding and sort of leeway, maybe even sympathy, but I would say leeway. There's a lot more leeway given to Ruben Amorim because of the context of which he's taken this job. So I think it was well documented that, he said it himself, he wanted to come at the end of the season. He was given an ultimatum by Omar Barada and co, and basically a now or never. So we said now. So with that, I think there's an acceptance from Manchester United fans that, the players who have essentially thrown Ten Hag under the bus and got him sacked, done the same to Olley, etc., etc. The players that Ten Hag bought as well that fit the way he wanted to play, which didn't last at all. There's an acceptance that Ruben Amorim is going to have his work cut out, changing that system halfway through the season, has barely managed to buy or sell a player. I mean, we take January out of it. I mean, bringing in Patrick Dorgu is a start, but other than that, there isn't any major work done. Of course, Aidan Heaven's been brought into the squad from Arsenal, but again, a youngster that cannot be relied upon now. So his hands are tied. You've got players there who don't have a future there on big contracts, or either on big contracts or they've fallen out of favour and just aren't good enough, or don't want to be there, or a combination of all three. So he's had to deal with that. And of course, like you say, he's a young, aspiring manager who's learning the league and learning a lot of tough lessons. So I think fans are absolutely behind Ruben Amorim. They understand that Manchester United is a broken institution and it's going to take a long time to rebuild. Of course, there's frustration sort of per 90. As fans, we get emotional per 90. When you try to dissect, that Leicester result, I was very scathing in my analysis of our performance because it was really bad. The same when Southampton came to town and outplayed Manchester United for the best part of 80 minutes, and then Ahmad saves Manchester United with a hat-trick. Fans are onto things like this, and then some of the conversations have led to, should he tweak certain things for the players? Should he tweak the system? Should he tweak the formation? But then it leads to differing of opinions from fans, and this is what I'll say, especially on our online community. Some fans are saying, well, these players aren't good enough. We know they're not good enough. You've got players that are either injured all the time or just have proved they are not good enough. So what's the point in investing into them to change for them? Whether it was a 4-2-3-1, a 4-3-3, or a 4-4-2 under Eric Ten Hag, they still finished 8th and ended up getting him sacked. What best are we trying to revert back to? What's the base point? So is it not better to stick with the principles and basically weed out the players who don't have a future here? But then the pushback to that is Manchester United aren't going to sell 10 players in the summer and bring in 10 first-teamers in the summer. So there has to be some trade-off. So I think he's learning. I think he's made a couple of mistakes along the way, and I think that's fine. I think that's okay for us to accept that as fans. He's admitted that in the press conference, offering up big lines to the press, such as we're the worst team in history, and offering up lines like, I'd rather play the 60-year-old goalkeeping coach instead of Marcus Rashford, etc. And he says it in tongue-in-cheek because he comes back afterwards, sort of not with his tail between his legs, sort of saying, okay, I promised Andrew I won't go down this route. I need to. You can tell he's trying to learn. So I just think my fans are patient with him overall. I wouldn't say anyone's fed up, and yes, they were expected to see more improvement than we have seen from Ruben Amorim and the team from now. But I think there's an acceptance that this squad is just completely void of fulfilling the demands that he wants to set out.
Flex, just as a fan then, sat here right now, where do you stand on United's future? Are you sitting there thinking or feeling optimistic about what the future holds, or are you thinking maybe a bit more pessimistic that, I don't know, we could be sat here in 5 years' time talking about the same issues? I mean, where do you see Man United in 5 years?
Yeah, definitely the latter, Rob. Definitely the latter. I'll be honest with you. I'd love to sit here after a year of INEOS and go, you know what, things are starting to go in the right direction. Finally, we've got some good guidance. Finally, we've got a good structure. Finally, we've got a good manager and we're playing. I'm seeing improvements. But the truth of the matter is those things have not happened. And I sit here today as a United fan, very, very worried, very apprehensive about what's around the corner. There were times where in certain periods, I'll be honest with you, and maybe this is the fan in me and the overreaction in the moment, but going into that Arsenal and Liverpool games when they were back-to-back, after we just lost to Newcastle, I was like, I think INEOS are quite volatile. I don't know if Ruben's going to make this. Do you know what I mean? Like, if we went into Arsenal and Liverpool and lost 5-0 apiece, which is how the team was playing at the time, you just start to wonder. So I've not been in a good place as a United fan at all. But I do worry for the future because I'm just not, INEOS have not filled me with confidence. I speak for myself. They haven't filled me with confidence that they've taken the ball by the horns. They know what they're doing. They're clinical in what they're doing. Some fans saw what they did with Dan Ashworth as ruthless. And I saw it as incompetence because you've earmarked this guy, decided he is the guy. He's come in for a short period, and then you decided he's not the guy. To me, that's incompetence. And some argued it's ruthlessness because if that was Ed Woodward, they'd stay and let it rot, even though the relationship was decaying. But for me, to get that so wrong so early shows incompetence. And now that job role that was so important has been soaked up by Jason Wilcox and Christian Vivell, etc. So really, did you need that role? It doesn't fill me with confidence. And the recruitment as well is something we need to address. I think they've got better at maybe some of the contracts they've handed out. They've tried to stay away from, huge sums of money. They've tried to stay away from giving out contracts that are too inflated. I understand that, but I'll be honest, I'm extremely worried about what's around the corner because there hasn't been much improvement on the pitch. But I'm willing to be patient with that. give Ruben a pre-season, give Ruben the players that he needs, but also how difficult is that going to be in the summer? You know, if Marcus Rashford doesn't do too well at Aston Villa and then's back up at United with no suitors on 325 grand a week, Casemiro still on 350 grand a week. He's got a year left in the summer. Does he still sit on that? If Anthony doesn't strike it rich at Betis, he comes back. How do you shift him? You know, there's a lot. There's a lot. You know, it hasn't worked well with Højlund and Xerxes at the minute. Do you look at offers for them? Mason Mount, what's gone on there? Luke Shaw, forever injured. He's on a couple $100 grand a week. Is he going to move on? So there's so much to fix, and I'm willing to be patient, but I'm also not very confident about the next couple of weeks, to be honest, let alone years.
Well, just finally then, I mean, you've obviously touched on how much there is still to do. And you know, the question really is what can the club do to get the fans back on side? Now, obviously, win games and sign better players is a big part of it. But sort of beyond that, in terms of just INEOS's relationship and the sort of day-to-day interactions that they're having, I mean, what can they do to sort of change the mood and maybe change the perception about them that obviously is so negative in so many quarters?
Well, first of all, of course, is make better decisions, right? But even if I understand difficult decisions have to be made, nobody wants to see people lose their jobs. Nobody wants to see redundancies. Nobody wants to see club ambassadors, you know, not represent the club anymore, etc. But I understand that tough decisions need to be made for Manchester United to get out of this mess. I understand that. I just think the communication as well. The sheer lack of communication and dialogue with fans. It shouldn't have taken for, you know, them to write to the 1958 group or must to communicate these. They should have been much more forthcoming than that. I think they need to be more loud in terms of communicating what it is they're trying to do and why they're trying to do it. And I think they need to start, unfortunately, increasing the strike rate of decisions. So they've got off to a bad start. Now they need to start getting things right. Okay, you start with the manager. The fans like Ruben Amorim. They like his charm. They like his personality. They like his communication. Of course, it's not going right on the pitch, but as long as the players are fighting and Ruben keeps speaking well, the fans will be there behind him. So you could say that's a start. You know, they've got to start showing that they're being ruthless with the squad in terms of how to get rid of players who are surplus. They need to prove that the recruitment's going to improve again in the summer, and show that they mean business, because for far too long now, it's basically been a load of talk. What I've seen as a fan is Sir Jim Ratcliffe strolling here saying he's going to put the Manchester back in Manchester United, whatever he means by that. You know, go on to say that Fulham shouldn't have higher ticket prices than Man United, so I'm gonna put the ticket prices up. I don't know if he's seen or lived in Southwest London. He's a very rich man. It's a different demographic down there for sure for ticket prices, living there by the Thames. And then I've seen him sort of lording it about Dan Ashworth, etc., and then, you know, sack him a few months later. So it's got to be better communication and just start getting a better strike rate with these decisions, because if you keep having these bad decisions, fans are just not going to get on board with what they're trying to put down.
All right, well, that's the fans' view. Thanks very much to Flex for joining us. Well, one of the points that Flex made there towards the end was about obviously recruitment. Guys, do you get a sense? I know it's early and there's obviously a few months to go till the summer window opens, but I mean, do you get a sense yet of where INEOS are in this cycle of cutting and redundancies and cost saving to then get them to a point where they can invest significant money in the squad? Do you think the money will be there this summer for Ruben Amorim to shape the squad in the way that he wants, or are they still going to be reliant on outgoings first?
I don't think that there'll be enough there for a Ruben Amorim to shape the squad in the way that he wants. I'm sure that there'll be money made available. You only have to look at the January window to see that. United had kind of said privately that there would be no money to spend in January, that they were sailing too close to the wind in terms of PSR, but the results have been so bad that all of a sudden they found almost £30 million to sign Patrick Dorgu, a player that they felt they just couldn't do without for the rest of the season. So I've got no doubt that money will be there. I think the issue is how much and how it's generated, because everyone will know that there was an awful lot of speculation around Kobbie Mainoo and Alejandro Garnacho in particular during January, and that was simply because they're academy graduates, and any sale or any transfer would have gone down as on the books as pure profit, and that's the kind of boost that Man United are looking for at the moment. And United are still not knocking down the suggestion that they would be open to offers for Kobbie Mainoo and Garnacho in the summer, and that tells you what kind of financial position that they're in at the moment. I think it's going to be tough for a while now. January was tough. I think it's going to be tough in the summer. I think it's really, really key that United get some players out the door, that the players on big contracts, the likes of Marcus Rashford, Anthony, Casemiro, it's likely that Eriksen and Lindelof will leave because they're available on free transfers. I think if you get Casemiro and Rashford off the books, you may start to see a little bit daylight in terms of the budget, and then you can go and maybe reinvest elsewhere. But there's no guarantee that you'll be able to get rid of Rashford and Casemiro. They're both on contracts. Casemiro has still got a year left on a contract that's worth more than £300,000 a week. You're not going to find that anywhere else in Europe. Possibly in Saudi Arabia, but that would rely on him wanting to go to Saudi. The same is true of Marcus Rashford. He will probably have to take a pay cut. He didn't show much desire to do that in January, and he's still getting his full wage. He's just being made up by United and Aston Villa now. So there are going to be a lot of tough decisions that need to be made in terms of players in and out. I think the issue is that United may start next season with fans feeling very, very underwhelmed, and then we all know, we've all seen it with different clubs and different managers, that it can unravel very, very quickly once that happens.
I think the FA Cup and the Europa League are massive for United, because the Premier League is gone in terms of qualifying for Europe to the league. They're so far adrift that it's not going to happen. So at some point, it maybe has already started that they have to focus on the cup competitions. The golden ticket is the Europa League. Win that, you're in the Champions League. Then all of a sudden, United's financial problems, they don't lift, but they certainly become a lot better, because they'd have a lot more money coming in to bring in the players they need. But that's a real kind of tightrope strategy, isn't it? Where you're banking everything on winning the Europa League. Now, I know Jose Mourinho did it in 2017, did that, got in the Champions League, but I just don't think with this United team you could back them to beat any of the Tottenham, Athletic Bilbao, Lazio. There's some teams in there that you'd think over two legs United would struggle to beat. So they're going to go into the summer. Let's just say they're not in Europe. The worst case scenario. Rob's right. There's 4 players out of contract that will leave. There's 3 players, as you mentioned, Anthony, Casemiro and Rashford, who are under contract but need to leave because they're on loan and they're not playing. Then you've got Lisandro Martinez, who's probably going to be out until maybe up to Christmas with a cruciate ligament injury. So how do you replace him at the back? Do you find a left-sided defender? Do you try and find your way through to Christmas? So that is just 8 players that need replacing or need cover without even addressing the key aspects of a centre forward. They desperately need a centre forward, because obviously Højlund and Xerxes aren't good enough. I'm amazed they went through January without even trying to get somebody on loan, because that a loan signing could have been the difference between winning the Europa League and not. So worst case scenario, they get to the summer, 8 players need replacing for a start. They won't replace 8 players with no money. You're looking at bargain signings. When you look at bargain signings, you make mistakes. Man United make mistakes when they look at £90 million players, never mind bargain. So it's a really, really difficult situation that they find themselves in. I don't know how they get out of it. I don't think INEOS know how they get out of it, aside from, hitting the jackpot by winning the Europa League or somehow finding sponsorship revenue they haven't even tapped into. I don't know why they haven't considered, or maybe they haven't publicised it yet, naming rights to Old Trafford, because they're now at a competitive disadvantage by not doing that. Arsenal get money from Emirates, City get money from Etihad. We Tottenham obviously don't do anything right now, but they could do. So I just think that United could all of a sudden find £40-50 million a year by selling the naming rights to Old Trafford. Maybe tie it in with the training ground. It's money that they're not picking up, which they need to, because rather than cut people's jobs, just go out there, swallow your pride, and offer the naming rights to Old Trafford. I think the days of fans being touchy about it are still there. But like I say, if 250 people are losing their jobs because they haven't got enough money, does the naming rights to Old Trafford really become a sacred cow they can't touch? I don't think it does.
Well, and I want to go on to the cuts, because it seems to me that very few examples of where there's been such a straight line drawn between the first team needing money and the staff taking the hit on that. I remember that Arsenal let about 50, 60 people go during COVID because they claimed that they needed to, make the money back there because obviously the losses from people not being in the stadiums and things. But very rarely do football clubs go through these rounds of redundancies, particularly the big clubs I'm talking about, while trying to justify that kind of loss, that sort of staff loss, by saying, well, this is going to help the first team. I mean, you two obviously know people there. You've covered the club, both of you, for a long time. Can you give us a sort of sense of what morale is like, and just how the sort of people have lived this on a human level over the last year? That maybe when they thought, well, INEOS are riding into town as the White Knights, and actually, many of these people have either had their hours cut or their jobs lost altogether by these people they thought were going to come in and save the club and take it to a new future.
Well, I had a message yesterday from somebody asking if I'd heard anything about redundancies because they're worried about their jobs, So the morale it's much, much lower than rock bottom. I've never known it so bad, and it's just in a really bad place, especially when you go back a year when Ratcliffe and Brailsford coming in talking up the club and saying they're going to help the club. The morale initially was like, oh, great, these guys are going to save us after 10, 12 years of glaze and nomics, that no money for anything. And it's become worse and people are fearful for the job. So morale is terrible. We deal with the media department quite a lot. The media department of Man United is probably smaller than Brentford or Ipswich. It's tiny because they laid off so many people. So the so-called biggest club in the world have got a media department of about 3 or 4 people. It's just, in terms of actually, there's social media accounts all over the place. But dealing with us, it's so small because the cutbacks have been so big. And it's like, you're Man United, you need to be growing that part of the club. You need to be getting, there's certain areas that you need to be growing. And it's really sad, but the morale is, Rob will probably back this up, it's woeful.
I think that United for a long time existed. I know they're a global brand, but they tried to be a family club. They were big into kind of rewarding long service, rewarding people who played what perhaps we would all consider a fairly minor role, but they were very, very keen to kind of celebrate that. They loved the fact that there were people working at the club for sort of 25, 30 years. I think at one stage you got quite a nice watch for being there 25 years or 20 years, or you got quite a big bonus if you'd been there for 30 years. There was a reason why Man United employees stayed there for so long. And over the course of the last year, really that's been decimated. And go back to what I said before about, you mentioned there in your question about there has been this line drawn between the club employees and the first team that we're trying to save money within the club to pump into the first team. I know for a fact that a lot of first team players are really, really uncomfortable with that narrative. They don't want to be held up as kind of, you need to lose your job in a ticket office because we need to buy better players or we need to pay players better. The first team players who are at the club, a lot of them are really, really uncomfortable with that. And I was on tour with United in the States in the summer, and Johnny Evans stopped in a mix zone. And the club were really, really keen for us not to ask him about the cuts and redundancies. And he decided to take that on himself and speak about it. Now, Johnny Evans is in a quite a good role to speak about that because his family have had connections with the club for years. He's been there since he was a schoolboy. His wife works for MUTV. And he was the one that came out and said, it's a really, really difficult time for everyone at the club. It's really not nice for first team players to see that, club staff that they've worked with for, decades are losing their job. And, these aren't multi-million pound footballers. These are people, real, just normal people who were earning, the average UK salary. And, now LinkedIn is full of people who used to work at Man United, desperate for work because they need to pay their bills and they need to pay their mortgage. And it's really, really not nice. A lot of fans, I think, will be listening to this and say, well, yeah, but, these are the tough decisions that have to be made. And there probably is an element of truth to that. Whether the cuts have had to be as severe as they have been, only INEOS and Sir Jim Ratcliffe will know that. But on a purely human level, it's been really, really, it's tough for me and Mark. I'm sure Mark would back me up to work so closely with United and people that we've known for a long time, go through quite a hardship and lose their job. So God knows what it's like for the actual people who are at the club, who have seen, close friends and colleagues go through all this. And certainly the players, I mean, look, as mentioned before, that a lot of the players are really, really uncomfortable that they're kind of being held up as the beneficiary to all this cuts. And it's right now at Old Trafford, it really is doom and gloom. Results are terrible. Performances aren't great. But behind the scenes, there are people who are really, really, really worried about their futures and their jobs. And Mark is exactly right. Morale is as low as I've ever seen it at Man United, and it really is. Rock bottom is not too strong a word.
I've had people come to me, sorry, James, I've had people come to me and said, do you know anyone at Man City who has any jobs going at Man City? And you can see why, Man City are a very successful club. They've got wealth from Abu Dhabi in it. They are a fantastically run club, Man City. Man United fans might not like to hear it, but Man City are what Man United used to be 20 years ago. The best in class, invest in the right places, don't skimp on things. Everything is done to, money isn't wasted, but money is invested. Value is where value should be. And United have gone where City were 20 years ago. The roles have just gone completely full circle, where City used to be a club that would scrimp and save and make stupid mistakes and unhappy staff. But the point is that people are looking at City thinking, I want to work at Man City, not Man United.
Well, I mean, they do still have 115 questions to answer about the way they run, but
True.
That's subject for another day. But in the middle of all of this, of course, there's the new stadium plan, which is, on a grand scale. Obviously, they're going to decide soon about whether they're going to decide whether they're going to redevelop Old Trafford or build a new arena completely. I mean,
that's the latest deadline. Yes, it's been put back a few times.
And this is at the heart of everything. The new stadium is at the heart of everything, because when that strategic review was first announced by the Glazers, that was done because they knew that they had to sort the stadium out because it was just not fit for purpose, and they knew that they didn't have the money to do it. And I'm sure lots of fans will remember that Richard Arnold went to meet a group of disgruntled fans, head him off at the pub, and he was filmed, talking about the need for a cash injection. And the reason that United needed that was because they needed to fix the stadium. Now, the Glazers started looking at whether to sell or whether to accept investment on the understanding that investment would pay for the stadium. And now you've got Sir Jim Ratcliffe, who's bought a minority stake in the club and is kind of fronting the club now, is then now saying, well, we need to find the money for the stadium still. So no one at any point, all these grand plans that people have seen, they've been to the Conservative Party conference. I think they went to the Labour Party conference to show off this great new plan for a fantastic new stadium in Manchester. No one, not one person involved in that project has been able to answer questions about how they plan to fund it. And that is that's the biggest question, because James, you will know this better than anyone, that when Arsenal and Tottenham tried to fund their new stadiums, there was a financial black hole at those football clubs, and they were not competitive. Arsenal were not competitive for quite a long time because they were having to pay for the Emirates. And so now United are already briefing and saying, look, we need to make these cuts to staff because we've lost 300 million over the last 3 years. That is before they try and find 2 billion quid to build a new stadium. They're already in dire financial straits, and they're talking about building this wonderful new stadium that they probably need, in fairness, to increase revenue. But where is the money coming from? No.
On that, Rob, though, you're right to reference Arsenal and Tottenham, but people at United will reference West Ham and Man City. 2 clubs in the Premier League with fantastic stadiums which are built by the taxpayer. Man City's stadium is not owned by Man City; it's owned by the Manchester City Council. They pay a kind of a peppercorn rent, which is it's minimal for maybe 100 years. And West Ham are the same. They're both basically given free stadiums. Now, obviously, we've both been to the Etihad and the London Stadium. Around that, there's lots of regeneration. There's certainly at West Ham, there's shopping centre, there's accommodation, there's hotels. It's similar now at the Etihad with the arena. And the idea is that Man United want some public money to transform the stadium, but also transform the area around it. And let's be honest, the area around Old Trafford is not pleasing on the eye. It's warehouses, it's distribution centres, it's depots. It's an area that does need regenerating. But the argument would be a lot of people, quite rightly, in the situation where we have, government struggling to fund projects, a football club, one of the biggest clubs in the world that makes millions and millions of pounds every year, asking the public to pay for the stadium doesn't stack up. But that is the idea. And obviously in the US, we know that in America, stadiums are often partly funded by local authorities, cities. So I know where they're going with this, but the optics are terrible. But you're right. Arsenal, Tottenham are the reason why they don't want to pay for it themselves. Man City and West Ham are the reason why they want a handout.
And you can't point to City and West Ham and say, well, they got a free stadium, give me a free stadium. And you talk about the optics and the narrative around it. So Jim Ratcliffe is based in Monaco for a reason.
Absolutely.
So how can then he, as the figurehead of Man United, go to the government and say, I want taxpayer money to fund Man United's new stadium? If there is a plan for payment, then great. Tell us. Tell us how you plan to fund this stadium. Don't stop talking about Wembley of the North. Sick of hearing about Wembley of the North.
Well, nobody in the North likes Wembley anyway, so maybe that's what I said.
Stadium.
We've got the message wrong there because nobody wants Wembley because it's I won't say you know what Wembley is if you're from the north of England.
So they need, but someone at some stage needs to tell United fans or the wider public how this project is going to be paid for. Because right now they may as well be talking about building a stadium on the moon.
Do you know something though? Jim Ratcliffe could pay for it himself. He's worth billions. He could build it himself. That could be his legacy to the city he grew up in. He's a Man United fan. We all know this. He's come up from his bootstraps from Failsworth in Manchester 70 years ago. What a legacy that would be for Britain's richest man to gift a stadium to his favourite football club, call it the INEOS Arena, whatever you want to call it. There you go. That's his legacy. But obviously, these things are fantasy, so that's not going to happen.
Well, I want to finish by talking about Mission 21, but just before we do that, I also want to cover the women's team because we're talking about areas that have been marginalised. It seems as though the women's team has been particularly badly supported. I mean, where are INEOS with the women's team now, and do you sense that they are getting more serious about supporting them going forward? I mean, I know there's a Mission 1 accompanying Mission 21, but where does it sort of fit into their priority?
But which mission will be accomplished first? That's the big question, isn't it? Mission 1 or Mission 21? I mean, I'm not quite sure right now about Mission 21 to be done first. But, the women's team is an interesting one because obviously we know that in the last couple of years they've lost a couple of their big players, Alessia Russo and Mary Earps, on basically free transfers because they didn't renew their contracts and they were offered better deals elsewhere. So the investment in the women's team would seem to be not where it should be. And the argument of INEOS is that we have to get the men's team right because that's what drives the revenue. And once the men's team right, the trickle-down economics of it will be that the women's team gets better and what have you. I have to say that the women's team are doing quite well in WSL this year. The second, they won the FA Cup last year. There's a couple of stories earlier this season about their facilities at Carrington, the training ground, not being up to scratch. But the reality is that they're being improved and they're being upgraded. So they're in partially temporary facilities. So that was a bit of a scarcer. It didn't quite have legs. So in United's defence, we have to say that they are investing in their facilities. But yeah, they don't certainly put the same focus on the women's team as Arsenal maybe do and Chelsea, Man City. But ironically, the women's team are doing better than the men's team right now.
I think optically it's been awful for INEOS and their treatment of the women's team. Really simple things like United got to the FA Cup final and they played Tottenham and INEOS didn't send a representative. There is no excuse for that at all.
That was the same day that I think, did Joe Glazer, Avram Glazer went to the cup final, didn't it? And I think United played Arsenal. There was a Man United Arsenal Premier League game at Old Trafford that day.
Yes.
And the women's cup final the same day. So I'm just basically, giving the balance here. Avram Glazer went to watch the women's team at Wembley. Jim Ratcliffe went to watch the men's team play Arsenal at Old Trafford. So they should try to be themselves. So that was the Wembley. They always say that. Yeah, but they always say that the majority owners were there. That the Glazers were at Wembley.
No.
So
it was the first major showpiece game of their tenure at that football club. There should have been an INEOS representative at Wembley to watch the women's FA Cup final. Absolutely.
So Mission 1 and Mission 21 are part of Project 150,
which is mission impossible.
And this was a report in the Times that revealed this. And I just want to read a little bit of this, just for people who don't perhaps understand the detail of it. That this is obviously Sir Dave Brailsford, who previously was head of British Cycling, Team Sky. He's been INEOS's Director of Sport for, I think, 3 or 4 years now. Together with James Morton, who's a Professor of Exercise Metabolism at Liverpool John Laws University, and the Head of Nutrition and Physical Performance leader Team Sky when they were dominating the Tour de France. Morton oversaw the nutrition strategy for the riders when they claimed their Tour victories in 2015, 16, 17 and 18. And prior to that, Morton worked for Liverpool. Now, I referenced that because how is it right that a nutritionist and someone who's prominent in cycling is drawing up the blueprint for a football team to get back to the top of that sport. Does that...
Not right.
Am I being a slot, or does that not make sense?
Well, unless Ruben Amorim has said that's a great idea, bring him in. There's also an athletics coach, decided, I think he's 78 years old, who again has been brought in by INEOS. Look, these are all great ideas if the coach is on board with it. If these appointments have been made by Sir Dave Brailsford because it worked in cycling, which is totally different to football, then it's a bad idea. And maybe, Ruben Amorim has to be on board with all of these. If he's not, then it's a waste of time and it's just undermining him from the outset.
I think this is one of the main fears that fans have got with INEOS, is that INEOS or Dave Brailsford in particular, his sporting success has come in cycling, which in this country was massively underfunded. And they spent an awful lot of money on cycling and their coaching and training and these marginal gains that helped British cycling become, Olympic heavyweights in that sport. But the entirety of cycling, of track cycling, was underfunded. Football is not underfunded. It's going to be very, very difficult for someone to reinvent the wheel when it comes to football. All of these things have been done. You're not going to find these tiny gains to give you that edge in football because people are already doing it. Everyone's got, specialists in every single department finding these tiny little percentages. You can do it in cycling because no one was looking at it at the time. And when you start to look at it, you find these minor pluses that when you put them all together becomes this big thing, and then you end up winning loads of gold medals at Olympic Games. That's not football. And that's the problem that a lot of the Man United fans have got with this at the moment, is that when it comes to mainstream sport, let's say football, INEOS haven't got a great track record. So we're in the realms of the unknown still, and we're a year in. And that's one of the major concerns that United fans have got.
But the problem is they talk about the expertise, and they're bringing expertise from other sports, and we don't know if it's going to translate. But just getting back to the appointments, we started off talking about Dan Ashworth. Well, Omar Barada's coming from Man City as the CEO. That people at City told me he was a big loss, and that Barada's impressive. So we'll wait and see. But Jason Wilcox is now in a role whereby he's basically replaced the Dan Ashworth role. But Jason Wilcox was an academy coach at Man City, and he spent a year as director of football at Southampton. That isn't really the grounding for the role at Man United. What are Jason Wilcox's contacts like? Does he know the European market? Does he know where the best players in France are? Does he know the best players in Italy that are coming up? Because you can bet that Liverpool do, and Man City do, and the clubs like Brentford and Brighton do. So I'm just a little bit... My doubts about INEOS is that who are they hiring and on whose advice are they hiring it? Because they made a mistake with Dan Ashworth. Not because Dan Ashworth's a bad appointment, but the wrong appointment, the wrong job. So again, if it's Dave Brailsford who knows about cycling, if it's Jim Ratcliffe who knows about chemicals and putting money into a sports club, it's not the right people. So, but as we know with these, very successful people, they tend not to appoint people who might challenge them. They want to appoint people who will basically be grateful for the opportunity. So if they were to appoint a very successful sporting director that's been successful elsewhere, he would want his own way. And that is where the problems come with people like Brailsford and Jim Ratcliffe, that they want to retain overall control, even though they're not qualified to have it.
All right, look, just finally, guys, before we wrap this up, I feel that we've been quite downbeat on this episode about INEOS in general. Can you both give me a reason for optimism for Manchester United fans? Can you give me something that sort of points to why we might be sat here in another year's time and thinking, my God, I can't believe how they've turned this around, and we never saw this success coming, and they're back on the right path, and they are walking towards the right direction after all. What are the green shoots that you guys would point to?
I'm going to mention something that Mark's just mentioned there, and Omar Barada, for me. Everyone will tell you that he's a really, really smart guy. He's was integral to what Manchester City did to make them the dominant force in English football. He's well versed in the processes that made City so good. I think it was really smart of Sir Jim Ratcliffe to maybe think outside the box a little bit to hire him as CEO, because he wasn't holding that CEO position at Man City. I think it's been an underwhelming year for INEOS, but I think if you're looking for one positive, the guy who should be running the whole show now, I think is a good appointment, and I think will be proved to be a good appointment when we look back at this in maybe a a year or two. I think he's a smart guy. I think it was a smart appointment. I just think at the moment he's got his hands tied behind his back a little bit.
You're right. Rob's right on Brad. I think if he's allowed to be the chief exec, then great. But I do worry a little bit about Dave Brailsford. I don't quite know what his role is at United. He seems to have this kind of minister with that portfolio role. He's Jim Ratcliffe's guy, but he's not the chief exec. So Omar Barada has to be his boss, not the other way around. And I think that would be the concern. If it turns out that Dave Brailsford has a direct line to Jim Ratcliffe that Omar Barada doesn't have, or if he dilutes the message to Jim Ratcliffe, then there's going to be problems. But in terms of positives, I mean, look, I could just space that say it can't get any worse, but obviously it can. Maybe this season is where the pain is. Maybe this is the difficult season where the pain comes this year, and by the time the summer comes, more players will leave, and it's a much more settled situation. But for that to happen, Ruben Amorim has to win a lot more games and start turning the corner, because you can't get from mid-February through to the end of the season in the form they've been in since Christmas, because that will just drain all belief and positivity in going into the summer, whereby people are worried about whether he's going to survive. So, but the positive is this could be the painful year, but I'm clutching at straws really on that one.
Well, there goes my attempt to end this in a positive way. I hope everybody enjoyed this bonus edition of the Football Reporters. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon.